And welcome to the second session in a series of Facebook Live events we are calling Conversations with Instructors. I am excited to be joined tonight by an excellent group of panelists and by all the viewers out there. We would love to know who's watching, and go ahead and drop in the comments where you're viewing from and how you happen to know NCOBs. Are you a student or a staff alumni, a prospective student, perhaps an excited, aspiring future staff member, or are you a student or colleague of one of our great panelists? My name is Sarah Goldman, and I am the Director of Virtual Programs here at the North Carolina Outward Bound School. Who would have thought we'd have a job title like that at an Outward Bound school, but so goes 2020. Tonight, we're going to be talking about what is on the hearts and minds of so many folks throughout the country, virtual learning. Sometimes we call this remote learning or online learning, but essentially we're talking about what is currently taking the place of crowded high school hallways and cozy carpeted kindergarten classrooms. School-age kiddos and their teachers dispersed in their communities, mostly at home, learning as best they can through the use of synchronous and asynchronous work delivered via some sort of digital interface. I think that pretty much covers it. I'm fortunate to be joined today by a great group of panelists representing a few different programs. First, Dr. Ned Burry, head of school at Episcopal Day School in Augusta, Georgia, and also the president and lead consultant of NRM Consulting. Next, Mr. Walter Bradley, a 7th and 8th grade associate teacher at Asheville's own Evergreen Community Charter School. I've had the good fortune to work alongside Walter in the classroom at Evergreen and can attest to his prowess at 8th grade math, thankfully for me. Next, we have Dr. Noah Tennant. Dr. Tennant is an assistant superintendent with the Philadelphia school system and former principal and CEO of Boys Latin School in Philadelphia. And finally, Dr. Gordon Grant, the director of education here at NCOBs. Dr. Grant is currently an adjunct professor at the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill School of Education, and he has over 25 years of classroom and administrative experience here in the Asheville City School System. So thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your attention. And for anyone who's out there watching who may now just be joining us, please let us know, where you are, where you're tuning in from, where you're watching from. We want to know how you're affiliated with NCOBs and what's brought you here tonight. So jumping right into the meat of the matter, let's jump right in and find out what technology platforms everyone is using out there, and how did you choose those platforms and why? And also, did you use any of these platforms prior to the overall switch to remote learning? So just would love to go around and sort of hear what kind of things folks are using out there.
So I'll jump in here. As a pre-K through 8, we've spent about 10 years preparing for virtual learning and sort of building a cyber school module. We're currently giving school-issued iPads to kindergarten through 8th grade, every kindergartner through 8th grader. We have one of the best things we did was use Jamf, which is a remote device management system that allows us to manage each one of those iPads remotely. In terms of learning platforms, we are a Google Classroom school in middle school and upper elementary. We like Seesaw better for preschool and early elementary. The biggest shift we made during last spring when we went full-time distance learning, we call it distance learning, was the acquisition of, I think 45 Zoom EDU accounts. And we found Zoom an incredibly important and powerful addition to that virtual learning platform we already had in place.
Great.
For us, it was a bit more of a crash course, and there was a steep learning curve for us. This was not something that we were explicitly preparing for, but we were fortunate in that, there were these pockets of innovation happening because, we just have such creative teachers and such resourceful teachers. And so many of them were very much ahead of the curve in identifying different tools, different platforms. And so, we had familiarity with, the Google Classrooms of the world, for instance. We had folks who were comfortable with Zoom, certainly not to the extent that we all are now. And really being able to bring in different tools that were going to connect with students in different ways. To hear Dr. Murray talk about sort of what works at different grade levels and ages with students, that was really something that we tried to be mindful of as well, and looking for the resources that were going to match up with our students' needs. So, one of the things that stands out to me was, there's a Learning Upgrade, it's called. And that was a system that not only had this focus on math and on reading, but also on digital citizenship. And, this new understanding we all needed to have about what it's like to be a part of this online virtual community. Another great aspect of that was that part of it is placement testing. And so it really allows us to target the interventions and the instruction that we need. That was also handy because it was app-based. And so for many of our students initially, their only access to this was via telephone, which is not ideal, but at least it gave them access, right away via the app.
For us, we started with Zoom and pretty much stayed with it. Simply put, beforehand, I was using Zoom because as an adjunct professor, rather than having to drive all the way to Chapel Hill, an 8-hour day out and back, I could have really meaningful interaction with Chapel Hill students in the education department. So I was doing Zoom before the crash, and we have found that expanding it after the crash, there's still a very tolerant platform that allows for a lot of these things. I've used some of the other ones you described. But one thing I would point out, don't be scared by all the names of the different apps. You can spend a lot of time chasing the newest technical widget and wonder, and we have found that a lot of our most meaningful interactions have been low-tech interactions on this platform.
Yes.
Yes, and absolutely. I was in the same boat as Mr. Noah there. We had to jump in head first, and we were doing some online or some digital resources, social responsibility, and we were interacting, especially in social studies, with different forums of how to take in the news and different sources and critiquing them. In math, we were using Kahoot and Gimkit and things like that. So the Zoom was just another layer. We like to look at it as like the icing that holds it, the glue that keeps everything together. So it's definitely a good thing.
Yeah, I really like that metaphor, Walter. That makes total sense. I'd love to ask this panel and maybe get a couple of responses about, what has surprised you through all of this with remote learning, both the positive and the less than positive. What have been those things that we just would never have guessed would have come up? So who's got an answer for that?
I'm happy to speak to that. One of the real pleasant surprises for really just this revelation of how adaptable, we are. We, like this collective we. However, that said, there's like this almost biological component of it. Like the younger an organism is, the greater is its ability to adapt. And so we very much have seen that with younger students being able to pick up on this, on these tools, and whether it's the hardware of it or the software of it, and sort of navigate that and find their way through. But still, that adaptability goes beyond just those young kids. I mean, we have probably all at this point, for instance, had these like virtual family reunions via Zoom, and maybe we have to tell like our great uncle, like, hey, you're on mute. It takes a little bit longer to pick it up, but that great uncle is still on Zoom, and like that is way far beyond where we were at one point. So that adaptability piece has been just a wonderful revelation, and the applications of that, having that understanding, the empowerment of that is something that I think will carry through for us. And then I would also say, it's been, I don't want to call this a surprise, but perhaps with some kids it's been a surprise. There has been like this realization that kids really long for the connection of school. Like they, even some of our most jaded, tough, don't want to show you that I'm happy kids. When we, for instance, did a teacher parade down the streets of Philadelphia to sort of celebrate our students, our graduating seniors, those were the kids that, broke down with happy tears or were smiling ear to ear. So recognizing that there was this longing for that connection that they really appreciated was just a wonderful realization.
Yeah, I would second all of that. And I know Gordon has a great answer to this question. But I would also add a really important revelation for us was that it's not just a matter of translating what we were teaching into a virtual model. It really, once we figured out, we really had to rethink everything about the learning and teaching proposition. And it required teachers not just figure out, how do I take this lesson or this unit or this content and transfer it, but what is essential about what I'm teaching here and why? What is its purpose? And now how can I recreate that outcome or experience given these other modalities and other tools? It's just a really rethinking the entire proposition, which surprise on the negative side is incredibly draining and time consuming. It's massive amounts of work and energy. On the upside, to use Noah's word, it has unleashed wonderful innovation, incredible advances that I think were being sort of artificially held back by systemic inertia. So I think there's a lot of improvements that we've been talking about in education that are finally coming to some fruition through this period of innovation.
Yeah, and I mean, if I can jump in, I mean, to that, Dr. Murray, I've seen the embrace of technology whereby some of us, you know, we graduated in, you know, I won't say the year, but when we graduated, yeah, right. We, you know, some of the platforms changed so quickly and we were slightly resistant and we're just like, oh, well, my word processing skills are there, but all this other stuff, I'll leave that to the younger generation. But, you know, some of us have jumped in and we have some habits of a scholar called, you know, one of them it was like perseverance and collaboration. For the kids to see us model these habits of scholars has been huge. And we've been open and honest about, hey, you know what? There was a glitch there. This happened. Or, you know, hey guys, this compassionate piece here is, I know this is tough. We're taking that pause, taking that breath, and we're just showing the kids where we are with this technology and we're growing with them. And that's been the really cool thing that I've witnessed myself. So, yeah.
Walter, that is great. And it makes me think about the conversations we've had around the country, actually, with the Outward Bound schools. Because one of the things we've really struggled with is Outward Bound on a computer. Like, this doesn't make sense. How does this, you know, it all align with what we do? And, you know, this idea of like, is this our brand? Like, is this what we do? And I think Gordon would probably agree with me that, you know, this is so on brand. This is exactly what Outward Bound is about. This is about resilience. This is about adaptation. This is about, you know, the perseverance through a challenge. You know, so of course we're doing this virtually. Of course we're gonna, you know, join all of you as you make this switch as well. So Walter, I totally hear that, and I love the authenticity and openness that you have with your students. Gordon, I may have just started to cut you off there. I'm sorry.
No, we're fine. This is a question number 2 about what has surprised us, both positive and negative, about remote learning. So I'll start with some of the overwhelming negative situation. There's a phrase that I thought was really powerful called ambiguous loss that I heard a researcher, Caroline Boss, talked about in a Krista Tippett interview that I recently heard. And ambiguous loss is an emotional state of unresolved tension about things that seem wrong. And we are battered right now as a culture with unresolved issues of COVID-19, of fear of constitutional loss of democracy, social injustice issues. All these things are direct tragedies, such as what has occurred in people hit with a hurricane or the fires out in California. You lose your home. That's not ambiguous. That's direct. But what we and our students and teachers are dealing with is this sort of inertial sense of loss of control of a situation. So that's the scary stuff. Here's the good part. It is addressed by dealing with community. You look at your circle of concern, and then you deal with your circle of control. And what we found is that the circle of control in a remote community that you build is directly applicable and directly sustainable and direct for students and teachers and families to be involved with. So that was a surprise to me, that a technical interface could actually provide emotional sustenance.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for sharing that. I think it's important as we kind of move on in this conversation to acknowledge that there's been a lot of challenges through this. I mean, these have clearly been, daily, whether it's the micro challenge of someone's power going out and they can't present, or if it's the macro challenge of having to really redesign how we're teaching our lessons and what that looks like. Love to hear from you all some of those challenges that you've faced and specifically how you've addressed them and tried to overcome those. Ned, did you have something that you wanted to share on that?
Well, yeah, and it really builds on what Gordon was just talking about. So, as I said, we were relatively comfortable in the virtual environment because we knew how to teach math lessons that way. What really took us by surprise was what it really means if you're going to do this all day, every day for weeks and weeks and weeks. All of a sudden, how do you sustain these relationships and nurture these relationships, and how do you build community? And the pace and energy is entirely different. So we had the instructional piece in place, but we had to really start from square one, which was how do we engage everyone, and how do we sustain our community? So in other words, we started our new schedule when we went to distance learning, not with the question, when are we teaching math, but with the question, how do we pull our community together? So we created new things. We created a Zoom morning meeting every morning, the entire community, 3-year-old through 8th grade, and adults on Zoom, sometimes for an inspirational message. I did Friday morning dance parties. But that was a critical piece for us, without which we could never have really successfully taught math. Mm-hmm. And building those touch points throughout the day and the week, and then completely rethinking the energy and rhythm of a day. I'm sure everyone here knows the term Zoom fatigue or Facebook fatigue. It's just exhausting. You can't string together time in the way we do on campus. And we probably shouldn't, by the way, when we are on campus, and I hope that'll be one of the learnings. But we really had to be mindful of time and energy and taking breaks. And I'll tell you a funny story and then I'll stop. During this time, I was running morning meeting from right here in my home. And I had a little time in between before my next Zoom meeting. I took a walk around my neighborhood with my dog, and I see one of my students in his driveway shooting baskets at 9:30 in the morning. And jokingly, because I know him and his family well, jokingly, I said, "Hey, why aren't you in school?" And he, without missing a beat, said, I'm in PE. And he was doing his PE activity for the day. But that's what we really found as the big surprise. It wasn't how to figure out instruction. It was how to figure out the other really important things that kind of had become unconscious in the course of the day. And I think that's what you're saying about Outward Bound, right? When you're in the environment, when you're on course, those things are sort of automatic. When you take that away, right, you have to be much more intentional about it. But like Gordon, we found the first and most important thing was establishing, sustaining, nurturing relationships and community. Without that, none of the rest of it was going to happen.
Yeah, I think that goes in any professional environment right now, as we all have moved into a virtual dispersed space. I mean, that connection before content piece is so incredibly important. Noah, Walter, anything to add on that?
Well, first, I hope we don't end this evening without experiencing what a Friday morning dance party looks like. So I hope that's something we can look forward to.
They're not paying me enough.
But yeah, just to sort of echo what they were sharing, that piece about mindfulness and making sure we're building those relationships is ever so important. And we've really tried to think about that in Philadelphia, as it impacts the caregivers to the students. So in other words, I'm afraid to fly, right? So whenever I do have to fly, I say to my wife, if she's talking during the flight attendant portion at the beginning, like, quiet, I need to listen to this. I need to know what happens if something goes wrong with the plane. And we all know that piece where they tell you if the thing falls down, you put it on yourself first, and then you're able to take care of others. And so that same theory applies. We really want to make sure that our adults who are so used to, and it's part of what led them to this field, they're so used to giving of themselves, to extending themselves, overextending themselves to help the students in their care. We want to make sure that they, as was said already, have the capacity to do that by taking care of themselves first. And so we have been able to implement a new program called Healing Together, which really emphasizes that for our adults, making sure that, again, they are sustaining themselves so that they can be in a better position to care for the students in their charge. If I can diverge a little bit on the challenges piece, I would say another thing in Philadelphia that this presented was it really laid bare some of the iniquities that existed already in our world, and certainly in our city and our community. Philadelphia is the most impoverished of the largest cities in the United States, and the pandemic really revealed how that plays out, in a community. And so for us, when this all happened in March, we suddenly had to think very deeply about how we were going to address the digital divide. The fact that, there are these, there are groups, some in our community and many that are surrounding our community that have access to technology and have access to the tools they're going to need, and some that just do not. Families who, because of their family dynamics, students who we would want to be in front of the laptop in Google Classroom doing their work instead are caring for their toddler sibling because mom or dad has to go off to work. Food insecurity. So thinking of issues like that and what and the impacts of that on education, and how students very understandably have to prioritize, and there's this sort of Maslow thing there, like they have to take care of some basic needs before we can expect them to learn. And so we were really fortunate that the community really rallied together, the philanthropic community, the business community, the educational community, to try to bridge some of those gaps for our students, and address that digital divide by making sure everyone did have access to technology, making sure that we could address food security by having several points throughout the city where meals can be provided, having access centers for families who have little kids, but they have to go to work, so that we can make sure that kids were taken care of. It was a really wonderful illustration of collaboration that way, and seeing how those different entities came together.
Yeah, right. That's Gordon's point about that circle of control and communities coming together. Unfortunately, I think in hindsight, we're going to look back at this time and experience a national embarrassment we still, despite those wonderful community efforts, on the whole, we left millions of American children behind last year. And many of them are going to be left even further behind this year. And they were already underserved. And it is an embarrassment because it is very much a solvable problem, and we have the resources to solve it.
Wow. And I mean, if I can jump in, I think this is a ground for another forum. Just this question alone can support another forum. What I can speak to is the chemistry that Sarah and I had in the classroom. What we're missing is that social emotional piece, or those social cues of, all this knowledge is, all this information is coming to the kids and it's blowing right over their head. You can see that or feel that in the classroom. However, digitally, we're missing some of those cues. And the way that we're building community, we're having like these unrecorded hangout sessions, or we'll have a crew of just maybe 11 or more kids, and we're just talking with cohorts, and we're saying, okay, give us a fist of five. One being, I am in control of everything we have going on. All of my assignments are great. Or 5, I'm losing everything. I can't keep things together. And I had one student say, I'm at an 11 right now. So, just having those, having to recreate a community feel so we can get those cues so that we can develop. So, I agree with Dr. Murray and Dr. Tennant. We have to just create these different things, knowing all of this other stuff that kids are having to deal with in the background.
Absolutely, absolutely. Those are great points, Walter, and great points from everyone. You're right. This conversation alone will go on for a long time, right? And both in hindsight as well, Ned, as you mentioned. Just let's talk about bright spots. Let's talk about things that are really like uplifting in this time, in this space. And this is similar to the question about sort of what surprised us, but maybe this is just the stuff that's going really well and the things that are making your heart sing in education right now. So if anybody'd like to share some of those bright spots, I'm sure everyone who's watching would love to hear that as well.
I'd love to offer one, and I do want to make an observation. Isn't it interesting? Here we are, people brought in to talk about this technical computer interface, and what we're really talking about are matters of the heart and spirit community. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. So in light of that, when this blew up in March, and I remember I was at a school in Asheville, and I had just worked with our 8th graders, and we've been doing hands-on challenges, making these things called quantum puzzles. The very next day, Friday the 13th, that was it. That was the last of the classroom for that year. So we came back and we had the question, Sarah and I discussed it with instructors who were marooned up at Table Rock Base Camp. And we said, can we create virtual and remote experiences that at least get at the outcomes that we've been able to get in the wilderness and in the field? We didn't know. So we went and found out. And the nice thing is we've gotten this report that from people, let me just read the words of a teacher who was in a middle school classroom. He said, they are doing what might seem impossible. They're facilitating experiential group development and character education on digital platforms. The instructor team was incredibly professional, but they planned lessons, they met our needs with our culture to ensure student engagement and empowerment. So it worked. We sort of stepped back and went, my goodness, it worked. But that gave us the confidence to go forward. But it began in deep doubt.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You just described the experience most educators have had the last 6 months, Gordon. Well, that's well done, and congratulations to North Carolina Outward Bound School for diving into that and taking that challenge on. Wouldn't expect anything else.
Right. It's going to be kind of a hard sell at times for folks to try to understand what we were doing, because some people thought, oh, you're going to teach backcountry skills,
right.
thing, and we're going to get you on Zoom and we're going to talk about like how to tie a figure 8 knot, and that's not what we do, right? The way I've kind of explained it, or the way I've been sharing, is that Outward Bound is about creating novel discomfort, right? We're about taking people out of their usual day-to-day and leveraging that challenge for growth. Well, I think we can all agree that globally, we're experiencing novel discomfort. Globally, we're all feeling something new. We're all going through something different. So how do we capitalize on that? And how do we leverage that in the same way we would leverage 3 days in the pouring down rain, sleeping on the ground, right? Because these are all just challenge. This is challenge. And how do we, respond to that in the face of challenge? So hopefully we can continue to build those programs and learn from folks like you that are doing this day to day on the ground. And we can continue to develop our programs alongside. So those are our successes. I'd love to hear more about your successes.
Well, okay. I think you just described the biggest success of all of this, and you just gave the Outward Bound version of it. But it's what I talked about earlier. You can't just try to translate how to cook dinner or how to navigate into a virtual model. You have to say, why are we really doing this? What is the real purpose of this enterprise? And realizing that, gas stoves and tarps are just the vehicles to that end. But we've been doing it instinctively for so long. So many of us have really gotten blurry about those core goals. So I think a great outcome of this is we're getting clearer and clearer and clearer about what really matters in what we're teaching and why and the purpose of it. At least those who are really taking it on. I think a great bright spot and surprise was that there were some students who thrived in this environment. There are some students who actually did better, felt better, engaged more, and learned more. And I hope that other schools and systems like my school are going to try to unpack that and understand what's that about and how does that inform us going forward. And I think most importantly for us, for at least for schooling, I think it's going to finally help break that dam of, where the whole system is designed around seat time and schedules and one size fits all. I've seen so much more innovation with teachers. When you have kids in your classroom and kids that are distance and you're working on different platforms, you have to really be dialed into where every single student is and what they need. And some of these tools make that a whole lot easier to do, to give a group some advanced work, give another group some remedial work, and give this group some emotional support. And I think that really personalized, individualized attention to where each student is and moving them to where they need is something that I saw get really advanced and unleashed through some of the tools and the realities of the distance environment. So I'm very optimistic about that, because I've been very frustrated by how sort of fettered to an old model we were. We were bringing new stuff to the same old model. Seat time, one size fits all, same class march for everybody, all that kind of stuff.
It immediately makes me think of, how is that going to impact the workforce going forward and the teacher workforce going forward? And that was not something we had talked about, maybe talking about tonight, but just as you mentioned that and those changes and the paradigm and the model really shifting, what is that going to do in terms of those teachers in the classroom?
I'm really optimistic, as Walter pointed out. I think there'll be a rebalancing of the kind of academic intellectual content side and the social emotional development and community development side. I think people are finally realizing we probably got that way out of balance with the standardized testing movement and other things that went along with that, and seeing that sort of collapse under the weight of not having resources for building community, and realizing that those really have to be in a better balance. And I think that realization is happening in a pretty broad way. And this conversation, I think, reveals that.
And if I could build on that statement, I'm sure the educators in the room can help me with these terms, but the auditory learner, the kinesthetic learner, and the visual learner have thrived a little bit more in different ways that I'm seeing this happen. The reserve student that, there's a lot of stuff going on in the classroom, filling that space. When they're in this digital world, they can put on some earphones and really focus in on the content being delivered. And the kinesthetic learner that likes to click on some different links to get a different perspective, they're able to do this in real time, and they can supplement themselves in this. We're encouraging them. It's like, hey guys, you have a question, you can split your screen and do a Google search really quick. And seeing the kids I don't want to use the misnomer of multitask, but using their tools that are in front of them in such an immense way, and they're contributing to the class even more. I love it. It's like they're teaching each other. That's the bright spot. I mean, that's given me a little more motivation and joy, going into the next phase of this.
Wow, that's great, Walter. Thank you. Well, this conversation is sort of already going there, but our next topic, or just sort of the kind of last question to start tying this all up, is where are we going from here? I know that none of us really can predict the future. I've told folks that if Martians are living among us today and we find out tomorrow, we would just be like, yeah, okay, that makes sense for 2020. Sure, no problem. So without being able to predict the future, I'm going to ask you to, look into your fortune teller's ball and just give us a sense of where you think, where you think we're going with this, what we think will stick around, even as we do start going back into our physical built structures in the classroom. What pieces of this are here to stay? So I'd just love to hear some thoughts from y'all about what you think is going to be here kind of for the duration.
I'll share something that I certainly believe will be around, and I hope sticks around. We have seen new levels which I think is especially important when we're talking about students from our city. We've seen new levels of student agency that I hope continues. And some of that is small scale, right? Like some of that is, a student having to, connect with his or her teacher during office hours, during these virtual office hours, and, take the time to figure out how to navigate that and have that conversation, even though it might be uncomfortable, and have that one-on-one meeting. Or it might be sort of the conventions of an email to person. So some of them are these like technical small things, but on a larger scale, and what I find particularly empowering is that, we have seen students understand their role as digital citizens and as members of the same community or same collective community. So, more specifically, when we talk about the digital divide and what access looks like in one part of our city versus another, it was really inspiring to see, students from a neighboring community, a community that's a bit more affluent, organize and operationalize a march into the city of Philadelphia to a neighbor high school that's just 4 miles away in distance, but much further apart when it comes to socioeconomic levels. And so for that one group of students to march to the other, to start to identify some of the iniquities that exist, to start to identify the fact that, save those miles between them, they are the same kids and deserve to have the same voice and the same access to education, was really powerful. And I hope that sense of agency, I believe that sense of agency in small ways and powerful ways will stick with our young people moving forward.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. What else? What else are we going to take with us going forward?
I would offer that what we're going to get a reconnection to is a direct application of what most experiential educators know as Kolb's loop. And Kolb's loop is the underlying pedagogy of experiential education. You have an experience, you think about it, you reflect, you then generalize from that, and then you experiment again. And so what we're finding is that this remote learning, we have access to kids. A good example, back in the days when cell phones were just coming out, and I was serving an alternative school, and social workers would often complain that they couldn't find certain students or families. And yet I found by texting I could. And I may not get that family, but it was the number given to me of a neighbor just down the block who would go get that family and communicate with me. I feel the same way in direct experience using modern things like Flipgrid. The kids themselves can report and make stories and share them back with us that I think are really, really powerful. So I think Kolb's loop will be even more a connector for before direct experience. You set them up, you build a team, then you reflect on it, then you go out and have the direct experience, and then you make meaning from it afterward with remote connection. That's my hope. I believe it will happen.
Absolutely.
My hopes are that this digital platform is just another color that we could put on their palette so that they can create even more, beauty that they can add into the world. Because some kids, the sitting in the chair time that Dr. Murray was talking about, that is draining them. We're experiencing we're experiencing some of the Zoom drainage right now, at the end of the day. But some of the kids, when they're sitting rigidly in a seat, I see some of the kids being able to get up and move around. And this is the part that I want to, wherever the creativity takes them, to use this form to get there.
Wow, Walter, I love that. Another color to their palette. We should just stop there, Sarah. Just put it on a t-shirt and call it done.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have to tell you, I'm gonna provide my cynical answer to this, and then my dreamer answer to it. There's a cynical part of me that says all of these wonderful things we've identified are true and real, but they aren't true and real for all of America's children, and it's not true and real for what I think is far, far, far too many, and that a divide and a gap that existed in some ways is growing wider through this, not closer. And the great promise of technology has been to help close that gap. Now, there's one theory of change that says people don't change until the pain of staying where you are is greater than the pain caused by change. So my cynical side says it may be that this finally will exacerbate the gap to the point that something sort of radical has to happen and has to change. But if I follow that thought out, I don't see a pretty solution. It's a messy solution. But I'm very concerned about that. On the other hand, I would say that my dreamer side says we are finally doing the task that I personally have been writing about and encouraging educators to do for a long time, of deconstructing this thing we've built, literally deconstructing it and asking ourselves what is essential here and what is an unnecessary or old or outdated or outmoded thing. We have this wonderful thing in my school called ham ends. Do we have time for a real quick story?
Yes, absolutely.
Great old time story. So when I first got graduated, went out, got my first job in teaching, I was teaching out in Idaho and I wanted to be an adult. And so Easter was a good time for me to adult with my friends. So I wanted to have an Easter dinner. I called my mom and said, send me your Easter recipes. She sent me her recipes. Her ham recipe, step one was cut the ends off the ham. So I called my mom and said, what I know about meat is I don't understand. Why do you cut the ends off the ham? What is that about? She said, I don't know. That's what my mother told me to do. So she called her mother, at the time, I think 95 years old, and said, Mom, Ned has your ham recipe and he wants to know why do you cut the ends off the ham before you cook it? And my grandmother said to my mother, well, honey, that's what I had to do for the ham to fit in my pan. Handed down 2 generations later. So we go on ham end hunts at my school. What are things that we're still doing, the purpose for which is no longer relevant? You think about this in your life, you'll find a dozen, right? Sadly, I think there's a lot of this in education, and I think this period of innovation and really rethinking these modalities and how we engage kids in these tools is helping us really deconstruct what it is we're about, what's important for us to accomplish, how we're accomplishing it, and hopefully reimagining our purpose. And that is what I think will allow us to redesign a new system, top to bottom, that will not only meet the needs of individual children, but of families and caregivers, and of our communities, and ultimately of our nation and our planet. And so the dreamer in me says, this is really gonna push that kind of rethinking, and I'm excited to be in the conversation.
Oh, that is so wonderful. And what I hear coming out of everyone is opportunity, right? I mean, we are in a place where our hand has been forced, and what we can look at is the opportunity that we've been dealt. And it reminds me of just something I keep seeing online, which is, we're all saying all these negative things about 2020, but there's one of those memes going out there that says, what if 2020 is the year, right? Like, what if this is the year and this is the beginning of the rest? And we can really start looking at that in a hopeful way, and in the place where we can seize the opportunity to really, capitalize on a lot of things you just mentioned. So let's leave it there. Thinking about a hopeful future, thinking about 2020 perhaps being the year, and an opportunity to continue to serve our students, to continue to serve the youth of the country, and we are going to continue to serve our mission as well. I want to thank you all for your time tonight. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and it's been just sort of illuminating to see how what we've been doing at NCOBS is reflected also in the same things that you all are doing in a variety of different schools. Before we do sign off for the night, I definitely need to go ahead and make some NCOB specific announcements while we have folks' attention. First of all, like I mentioned, I am the director of our virtual programs here at Outward Bound, North Carolina Outward Bound, and we are offering programs for all types of students at this point, both our youth, educators, professional development, and also work with professionals. If you would like more information about those, please visit our website at www.ncobs.org. And right there on that front page, it will take you to our virtual programs. Or you can reach out directly to me, and my email is sgoldman@ncobs.org. I'm sure those things will probably end up in the Facebook comments as well. Additionally, we are very excited to share that NCOBS is returning to physically distant in-person programming starting just next week, which we are so thrilled to be shoulder to shoulder with our students again. We have a one-day hour-bound professional program down in Atlanta next week. We're currently able to provide in-person day programs both in Atlanta and North Carolina. So if you or your organization have an interest in doing some team development work, please also drop us a line. We are even more excited about the fact that our winter 2020-2021 season in the Everglades will begin in December. We currently have openings for adults on sea kayaking trips through the 10,000 Islands area of South Florida. And we are enrolling students in those courses right now in the winter. So we're very excited to be getting back to our wilderness programming, hopefully starting in December. Additionally, our entire summer 2021 course schedule is live and on our website, and those courses are also enrolling. So if you are someone who is a prospective student of ours, a teenager looking to come on course, or a young adult that's looking for outdoor educators courses or semester programs, those are enrolling right now. So please do visit ncobs.org and check those out, because what we do the best and what is at the core of our mission is the wilderness. So we are excited to be getting those programs back up and running. And then finally, the North Carolina Hour-Bound School is a nonprofit. We're an educational institution, and while wilderness programming is a large part of what we do rely on financial support from people like you that are watching. If you're able, a donation is always appreciated. $5 goes a long way, and our development folks would be upset at me if I didn't at least mention it. So please, you can donate online at ncobs.org/donate. And finally, look for our next Facebook Live event, October 1st. That's going to be an interesting event that's going to involve some alumni crews getting together, and it'll be really interesting to hear those folks and have them all sort of check back in with each other. So thank you all for your time and attention tonight. Thank you to our panelists. Really appreciate everyone's time and attention and all of the good work that you are all out there doing. May we all continue to be safe and healthy as we continue to serve our students. So thank you all. Thank you very much. Everyone have a lovely evening.
Thank you.